to share some of the ideas of the International Resources Panel, which is very much reminding the world that when we talk about green economies, when we talk about circularity, we have to get back to the basics of resource use and ensuring that we stay within the planetary boundaries when we're looking at resource use. That means a redefinition of the way in which we engage with resources. It means that every single country needs to understand where do they stand. As a European, we are fully dependent predominantly on resources outside of Europe, which means that we need to redefine our relationships, understand our value chain, understand our dependencies, as well as understand the way in which we consume resources, and our citizens should shift. So getting into a total behavioral change model of understanding how we can reduce the amount of resources that we need, focus on the different types of resources and how we can preserve them, regenerate them, and then very much enter into new relationships with the rest of the world around the way in which we as dependents can work with other countries to engage in a much more holistic relationship.
Much the solution space around indeed the original limits to growth report that absolutely decided on, and how do we actually make that economically viable. Thank you, Sandrine. If I come to you, Uroš, thinking about the context of Slovenia, and here I'm speaking from a position of particular privilege and pride in having partnered with the government of Slovenia for some time on a deep demonstration of circularity. As a government, how do you think about the relationship between circularity and economic competitiveness? What is your sense of this? How does this work for you?
Two aspects come to mind first. The first being the emphasis on strategic autonomy, which in today's world has grown so much in importance. But when we're speaking about critical raw materials, when we're speaking about overall materials, keeping them in the loop means that we are less vulnerable both to price fluctuations on imports, as well as we are less dependent on supply chains from abroad. So circularity is boosting our strategic autonomy, which is in the long run good for the economy. The second issue is that circularity to a large extent will focus on innovation, on creating new models of new economic models, creating a new use of new technologies. And this innovation is the one aspect where I feel that both Slovenia and looking at the EU in general, that's where we have to gather our long-term competitiveness. We surely cannot be more competitive at the cost of our environmental or social standards. We need to be competitive through creating additional added value, better growth models based on innovation, based on future technologies. And this is what circularity can give us the tools.
You mentioned critical raw materials, and certainly in Europe that has been one of the elements where indeed, as you say, Sandrine, there's been a bit of a wake-up on realising how dependent Europe is and where can some of those differences come, including from the repurposing of materials that are already in use. What, for both of you, what is your sense of the barriers and the enablers from a policy environment, from a government, a national government, and a European policy level? What are some of the elements around, or needed elements, to make it possible that policy creates a much more enabling environment for governments and businesses, communities to invest in circularity, not at the very end of pipe, it's a much more upstream, holistic solution? Where do you see some of the biggest unlocks or needed?
Well, one certain unlock that we need is we need a proper governance model. I'm speaking now on behalf of the state, on behalf of government, that we need new ways of tackling, just because old ways of tackling we can go. So this demonstration that we attempted in Slovenia's public administration to really promote systemic innovation, systems thinking approach through the way that we are doing things. And it helped us very much to identify already some levers on what we can do in order to be better, but it also had identified the obstacles. And the main obstacle of this team is that we are not used to thinking holistically. Each ministry is responsible or feels responsible for its own pattern of work, for its own field of responsibility. However, through the deep demonstration, we attempted to tackle certain value chains, for instance, on food, which means looking at both supply side and demand side, looking at the whole value chain through this. And that means it takes the effort of more than one ministry to do this, and most often it is precisely these challenges that fall between the responsibilities of two ministries, that no ministry feels responsible for that. That's where we stop in our efforts. And, so I think that's one. The second is I think especially in Europe, I think we have to do better on two things. We will need new technologies, so we have to be better on permitting, on speeding up the uptake of new technologies. We also have to be better in financing this innovation gap that allows in order to really to make the efforts necessary to really go green technology to the extent we need.
I want to build on the holistic element. I think that you're absolutely right. What we have really seen is the siloed approach, in particular of ministries and of governments, not only across ministries within one government, but also across countries, across multiple governance structures between local all the way to national to European, is one of the biggest barriers that we have. But I'll put in another element, and that is that we've done some bad governance as well. If we look at separation schemes and having actually sat on several boards that include aluminum companies, paper companies, etc., what we often are seeing is the sub-optimization of our systems. If you look at aluminium, for example, you can get up to 98% reuse of aluminium, and yet, in most cases, it's 50, if even lucky. Why? Because often aluminium is contaminated with plastic, which then can't go into a furnace, and if it can't go into the furnace, then it's just thrown away, not recycled properly. So we do need to rethink our recycling systems, the way in which we put in place the policies to enable these systems to function properly. But we also need to get back to basics of consumption. And that really is where the fundamental problem is, that we overconsume all of our materials, that we don't then optimize their use, but that we also overconsume our food, that we overconsume in a variety of different ways. And then I'd say the last point is we're still not thinking about materials, rare earths, and other elements that we're going to get more and more constrained. And there I think there's a broader issue around the geopolitics of materials. What we will see is more and more conflicts in the same way as we'll see more and more conflicts over water. We're going to see more and more conflicts over materials. Whoever owns the materials, whoever owns the rare earths are going to be the kings, and everyone else is going to be dependent. We just came from a session where we talked about hacking humanity back in. If we don't hack humanity fast into this new potential geopolitical power structure, then we're going to be doomed.
That's a very interesting question, Rand. I'm specific. I'm thinking in the context of a pavilion here on the World Green Economy. How do we think about reshifting global trade practices, renegotiating our global systems and our policy systems to really take almost a managed commodity trading, but for good and for sustainability? So I'm going to ask you both one last question. for this little vignette of what it is that one member state is doing within the European context. And it's a question, it's a fractal. To Uroš, I want to ask you, what makes Slovenia a compelling case for just demonstrating circular economy transformation at a national scale, which is an important scale? Here we are talking about NDCs. For a nation to be able to do this is a big deal. And what makes Europe, Sandrine, a compelling case to get its act together and do this well and leverage the Circular Economy Act, the Raw Materials Act, to really use policy to make Europe in a global context